Hello, everyone. Today we're back on YouTube to talk about money and the cost of an SEO service. Let me introduce myself. My name is Leopold Vins, and I run an SEO agency called Astrac. And with the knowledge I've started to gain about the market since I sell SEO all day long, I have a pretty good idea of how much SEO costs. And if you ever had to work with me, I'd be able to explain to you roughly how much it could cost. It would be in line with the prices I charge, but also with market rates, just to give you an overview of all the possibilities in terms of price and cost. When it comes to an SEO service, the first thing to know is that SEOs love to say, it depends. Every time you ask a question, an SEO will always answer, is it better to do A or B? They'll tell you, it depends. So just this once, I'll say it too. Today, the price of an SEO service, it depends. It's not always the same price. I'll be able to stream my screen for you. We've written a good blog article, and I'll be able to use it as a reference to present things to you as we go along and discuss a bit about what we can do with all this and how much it costs when it comes to an SEO service. Just so you know, I'm going to start with the basics on our end. With us, if you end up working with us, the services, roughly speaking, start at 500 euros per month. Quite simply, for us, it's not really worthwhile otherwise. We won't see any performance on a site where we don't invest at least 500 euros per month. That is a few hours of work each month to try to improve the SEO. In my opinion, it is sometimes possible that some freelancers offer services that might be okay for less than 500 euros per month. But honestly, between serious professionals, it's not really something that's going to be relevant. So I advise you not to go for services that are too cheap. Especially if you are in France, for example, it can happen that there are offshore agencies in Morocco or Madagascar that offer very cheap services because the labor cost is lower, but often there is a poor cultural fit and a lack of understanding of the business. So you end up with something that is not going to be productive, since the goal of SEO is, of course, to generate business for you. An SEO service, as you can see, we mentioned over 5,000 euros per month, and it can even go much higher than that. I know there are very large agencies that can sign contracts worth up to 50,000 or even 100,000 euros per month, for example, in American markets. In France, it's quite rare to see services that go above 25,000 or 30,000 euros per month, which is already very, very good, honestly. It's huge, actually, and that's simply because often it becomes more relevant to internalize the expertise when you start spending that much and relying so heavily on SEO. So the minimum price for us, and generally speaking on the market, is going to be around 500 euros per month to get a service, especially support, that will be worthwhile. Just so you know, our average is around, well, it's 1,900 euros per month. So quite simply, on average, our clients invest about 2,000 euros per month in SEO. This allows us to achieve effective results. Once again, you'll see that in SEO, the price is going to be a factor of speed and effectiveness. In my opinion, there is a small budget for maintenance, reporting, and things that are important to do in any case. So there you have it. Below 500, you can have things that allow you to maintain, to survive, but it will be difficult to really grow. For me, my goal is to grow websites, to grow businesses, and to increase my clients' leads. Obviously, the goal is to have things that are effective and to have a clean, efficient action time, because price is, in fact, a component of time. The first thing we're going to talk about is daily rates. So quite simply, how much does it cost in France to work on SEO? How much does it cost per day, roughly speaking? And so we have several things. For us at Astrac, we work with a daily rate that's around 700 euros. You might think 700 euros is a lot. You might think 700 euros isn't much. It always depends on your perspective. Agencies, big consulting firms, McKinsey and the like, charge 2,000 euros per day. Cheap freelancers, for example, in third world countries will charge daily rates that are much lower. So obviously, all of this is always a factor to consider differently. We made a small summary table of what the average daily rate is by type of freelancer. Generally, freelancers and junior SEOs will charge around 300 euros per day. Honestly, that's a daily rate we see quite often, and it's kind of the rate for junior freelancers who are looking to build a portfolio and develop their experience. They have 1 or 2 years of experience and are just starting out as freelancers. If you're dealing with a slightly more senior freelancer, someone who already has 5 years of experience generally, who will have a bit more capability, who knows what they're doing, who has a good command of these things, who has a solid process, they will generally charge between 400 and 600 euros per day. This is still a freelancer who will be independent, so you'll be dealing with just one person. You won't necessarily have the expertise of a collective, which is the advantage of working with an agency. You also won't have any support. If your freelancer gets sick, you have no backup and so on. There's no safeguard or security with freelancers. So it's more of a lottery, unfortunately, when you're working with freelancers compared to agencies, which can be a bit more accountable, have more resources, provide backup, and can hand over the project to someone else without any service interruption and with proper information transfer. These are the advantages of an agency versus a freelancer. We're used to knowing this. With freelancers, it's a bit more complicated to know who you're dealing with, whereas agencies tend to have a bit more reputation, a bit more volume, etc. Mid-market agencies, which is generally the category we belong to, we're basically at the top end of the mid-market. So it's not uncommon that in a call for tenders, we're a little more expensive than average, but we're also generally a bit more premium than average. So we're kind of at the intersection between the two. We're at the lower end of premium and the upper end of mid-market, whereas he is at Astrak, just to be completely transparent about what we do. The advantage is that it allows us to have a daily rate of 700 euros, which is lower than premium agencies. For example, I'll name a few off the top of my head, but companies like ADS Up Consulting, which I recently worked with, as well as Primelease and Eskimos, which are the big agencies in the market, they tend to have daily rates closer to 900 euros generally, whereas we're a bit less expensive. That's one of the advantages we have, roughly speaking. That gives you an idea in terms of daily rates, but overall with agencies, the daily rate doesn't tell the whole story because the big question is the quality of support you'll receive and their ability to deliver and produce efficiently and quickly. Obviously, if they're selling you juniors at 900 euros, that's not very appealing. If they're offering you seniors at 700, that's definitely a bit better. Now, the question is, how much will I be charged overall, and will my website actually make progress? Because you know the daily rate, but that doesn't really matter to you, especially when you realize that if someone takes 2 days to do something, like a keyword study that could be done in 4 hours, then we've wasted a lot of time. So basically for SEO agencies like mine in the mid-market, you'll generally see billing that's around, at my agency at least, it's about 2,000 euros per month. At other agencies, it's usually a bit lower, generally speaking. But of course, it will depend on your project. And generally, the price range will be along those lines. Next, there's the premium SEO segment. Here, you're dealing with large agencies in the big market. You'll get support that's fairly standardized. And these agencies have a reputation to uphold, so they'll do things that are quite nice. And you probably know them as well. They offer support that's a bit more expensive than what we do. Because they have a bit more structure, they're a bit bigger, they've been around longer, so they can afford to charge a bit more. And often premium SEO agencies will be more in the range of, well, here we've put 3,000. Honestly, they could charge you less, but they won't do much for less. Starting from 2,000, you begin to get some pretty nice things with these bigger agencies. Of course, it depends on the size of your company. If you're a big account, typically if you're Air France, it's more worthwhile to go with a premium SEO agency that's more equipped to handle you at scale, rather than with a smaller SEO agency, which will have fewer resources and less diversity in terms of what they can offer. Quite simply, a mid-market SEO agency will have 2 or 3 SEOs on hand. They'll generally do a bit of technical work, some content, some net linking, and a bit of outreach. But if you have a very specific issue, for example, programmatic SEO in the travel sector, they might not necessarily have the experience, whereas a premium SEO agency will generally have the experience to handle that kind of project. I'm telling you this because we have experience with programmatic SEO. So there you go. I thought I'd mention it. The question is, now that we've seen all this, isn't it more interesting to have an in-house consultant? Given the salaries, we've noted down SEO salaries. And here, these aren't even fully loaded salaries, but gross SEO salaries. To have viable consultants, their salaries will generally range from 3,000 to 6,000 euros per month, not including additional costs for you. And as a result, the cost can obviously be higher. Here too, it can be a little more. It's a bit of a lottery, since obviously it will cost you a bit less in terms of time spent. But you need to find the right person, the right employee. And what if you train them poorly or you don't have the right person? For later, the project can be complicated in terms of strategy. Because indeed in SEO, strategy plays a major role. So if you have the right mind making the right moves, you'll get something very effective. If you don't have the right strategy, you can spend a lot of time spinning your wheels and not know whether it's working or not. Because in reality, SEO takes 6 to 9 months to work. And so sometimes you spend 6 months spinning your wheels and it's not effective. That's why generally having the right agency, it's often the best decision you can make, I think, when you're starting out with SEO or when you don't have internal SEO resources and you don't really know how to go about it. That's just to give you a rough price range. Now, we're going to explain what can make SEO prices vary. What are the factors that affect pricing? The first thing is the size of the site. If you have an e-commerce site with 50,000 pages, obviously it's not going to cost the same as a showcase site with only 20 pages. If you have a very small business, I'll give you the example of a client who was an accountant in Dubai. He has 3 or 4 business-related keywords that are important for him to generate leads. Of course, we could develop an informational strategy, go after leads, nurture them, and so on. But overall, there will be far fewer things for him than for a much larger site, one that generates business from many more queries and has a much broader market. Again, if you are just operating in a single country or city, it will be much more targeted. Local SEO, for example, can be less expensive than what we would do on a national level, even though there are always very interesting things to do, even with local SEO and higher budgets. So clearly there is a component related to the size of the site. For us, it's very, very rare. In fact, we never even provide services for e-commerce, for example, for less than 1,200 or 1,300 euros, because an e-commerce site generally has more pages, requires more attention, and demands more effort. And even if there is less content to produce, generally on an e-commerce site, there are still quite a lot of things to do and a lot of things to look at in order to develop the site. Typically, the size of the site is a factor that will affect the price. The bigger the site, the more expensive it tends to be, because there are a lot of pages to manage. And technically, there are many things to pay attention to and to make recommendations about. And one part we haven't mentioned is that in addition to SEO costs, there will sometimes be development costs that you will need to account for. So keep in mind that when you have SEO support, it's not uncommon for part of the SEO support to also require time on the development side that you need to account for, because there will be technical development recommendations to implement. Next, there's really a question, and this is something I really want to emphasize. It's about the objective and the timeline. If you want to be number one in 6 months, it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible in SEO. SEO agencies will say, no, it's not possible, that SEO takes time. They'll say you only see results in a year, but that's not true. SEO can show results in 6 months. The key is that you need to have the resources to match your ambitions, and you have to be able to afford to invest heavily to get results in 6 months instead of getting results in a year. So there's really a speed of action component that comes into play with the budget. If you have a large budget, we could act very quickly and achieve something very effective. If you have a small budget, it will take time. Every time I make a proposal, I usually present one where I give an expected growth projection. What do I estimate the site will generate in traffic in a year? And I always tell people the same thing. If you want us to reach these goals faster, we just need to increase the budget a bit, and we'll be able to achieve these objectives more quickly. If for these goals you say to yourself, well, I don't have the budget, but I can achieve them in 2 years, then in that case, no problem. We could accomplish them in 2 years by lowering the budget a bit. Obviously, it won't just be a matter of dividing by 2, but we can draft a quote so that the objectives are reached more or less quickly. This is really something important. Next, there's a whole aspect related to sector competition. So there are sectors that are easier than others. I'll give you an example. Once again, my accountant in Dubai, we were in a situation where it was a bit less competitive than a sector like CBD, for example, whereas we support quite a few e-commerce businesses in the CBD sector, and that's a competitive field. So we need to have enough time to take action in order to do things properly, to have a budget to develop a lot of content, because a lot of content will be needed, and a budget to develop plenty of backlinks, to buy a lot of backlinks, because in a sector like that, you'll need to have a lot of backlinks. So basically, there is sector-specific competition depending on the quality of your sector, on how competitive your sector is, which means it can be more or less competitive. Sometimes I think back to Altega, which is a CRM agency that told me, wow, well, we happened to land on this keyword by chance, and where it allowed us to generate emptiness, we'd like to develop SEO now that we've realized it generates emptiness and that it's interesting. So quite simply, they were lucky to be in a market that was not very competitive in SEO, obviously, and to have been able to rank on a keyword quite easily like that. And then the question is, how do we develop SEO? They were in a market with low SEO competition, but they were moving towards something more competitive. So they asked themselves, how are we going to develop this? So there are really situations where sometimes by chance, with even very little effort, you can find yourself ranking number one in SEO. That's the case in a weak market. Obviously, it will cost less. On the other hand, if you go into a much more mature market, much more competitive in SEO, again, there are markets that are very competitive, for example, in brick and mortar, in physical stores, but that are much less so in online SEO. And so in those cases, potentially, it won't be expensive. So it's really an important factor. And once again, depending on your goals, whether you just want a top 10 ranking or you just want to get positioned or generate a bit of business, that's not necessarily the same as becoming dominant number one in the sector within 18 months, which again is achievable. It will depend on your marketing efforts and your budget. Finally, the last thing is the technical side. There are sites where the technical debt is huge, where we're still running on old PrestaShops or old Magentos from 2008, which can't be updated anymore, and so on. And these are situations where obviously we're going to have a lot of recommendations. We're going to have to put in a lot of effort because we're going to be fighting against ourselves, so to speak, in a manner of speaking. So these are situations where we'll have quite a lot to do, quite a lot of effort to put in. So obviously we'll also need more time, more development, more technical recommendations, and therefore more dev investment to be made on the other side. The advantage we have now with AI is that dev time is starting to decrease, and the importance of dev, or the time we allocate to it, is also starting to decrease. We'll soon be able to do development and make our own technical fixes ourselves. Soon. We're already doing it for some clients on the CMS platforms we're comfortable with. We don't do it everywhere, not all the time, etc. So there you have it. All of this basically covers the different price variations. And so you can quickly figure out that if you're running a huge e-commerce site on an old Magento in the CBD sector and you want to be dominant in 18 months, it's going to be very expensive. Obviously, it's going to be very expensive. We're talking about several tens of thousands of euros. On the other hand, if you have a very small site on a recent technology like Webflow or a fairly simple WordPress that was just set up and set up well, if you're in a field that's not very competitive and you have time, obviously it will be much less expensive. So that gives you a range to adjust the price, let's say between 500 and 25,000 euros. That gives you a fairly wide range. All of these are some of the factors that will be important. One exercise that people really like in SEO is the audit. It allows us to get recommendations and to know whether our site needs a lot or just a few things. We don't offer many audits because I prefer the support format. I find that with an audit, often the audit just gets filed away and isn't fully implemented. Whereas with support, it allows things to actually get done and to be sure that your agency pushes you to go live to achieve growth because we'll be judged on your results. In any case, that's our policy. So behind that, we push you to do this to find solutions with you so that it works. The prices of audits can vary quite a bit depending on several factors. For example, I'll give you the prices I charge for each of these things. And once again, we can typically offer more limited options if necessary. But generally, it's true that for a semantic audit, we charge more or less 1,000 to 1,500 euros for a good keyword study. That takes us roughly 2 days at a daily rate of 700 euros. Keyword study, content quality, seeing which ones, taking 10 to 15 of them, doing mappings, sample briefs, having editorial guidelines, etc. It will take us at least 2 days for a technical audit as well, depending on the site. It can be extremely quick. It might only cost 300 euros for a very small site. 2 things to check. It goes very fast and it's done. For very large sites, it can be, here we put 2,000, but it could be 5,000. I once had a very large old e-commerce site in the automotive sector, and I quoted 4,500 euros for the technical audit because it was simply necessary because there was a lot to do. Thank you. Several days of work because the testing phase was going to take time since it was a technology that nobody knew because it was dev work, custom built on an old school Java framework, not JavaScript, but actual Java web, a bit like what you see in the net linking audit part. Generally, it depends on whether we're just looking at the profile or the full profile analysis. The profile plus the recommendations typically, and how far we go with the recommendations. If we're just doing a net linking audit, for example, on the part link profile, it's going to cost between 300 and 700 euros roughly. If we move on to recommendations, we can go further. If we get into recommendations for a large volume of links, we can go really far. So obviously planning 50,000 euros worth of links is going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, much more than just 1,500 euros in this case. So depending on the budget you want to invest afterwards. And in general, a complete CCO is just a compilation of these 3 elements. That's how I do it, at least. And having a testing phase, depending on your support resources, how they are organized, the speed at which things will progress, and the technologies you use. So that's pretty much the whole audit part, which is quite important because it's an exercise that's often requested in SEO. Once again, we've already talked about this, but this is the inexpensive part. Be careful with offshore services. Be wary of large volumes of backlinks for very cheap prices. We know that it's not effective. Those packages where they promise to do all your SEO for 100 euros a month, that's just not possible. All they're really doing for you is providing a general report. And if you get 0 reporting, 0 audits, 0 visibility on the roadmap, if you have no information about what's happening with your account, no emails, no communication, that's often a pretty big red flag as well. Personally, I require every one of my services to include at least one call per month with the client to check how things are going. One email per week. We regularly make looms, little videos like that. The goal is for clients to have good visibility on what's happening. So generally, keep this in mind when you're doing SEO. It's something important. The consequences, the risks, well, manual penalties, it's something that happens much less often than it did 5 years ago. So it's still a risk that exists, but it happens much less now. What happens more frequently is simply a lack of growth, actually. The site falls behind, the site doesn't move forward, the site doesn't grow, the site doesn't change. There's no increase in traffic, there's no increase in leads. But in this case, it's not very interesting with AI and AI-generated spam now, which is quite common among SEOs. Sites that end up falling behind and actually doing SEO in the wrong direction, so quite simply just creating, they end up with a bunch of things that are useless, first of all. And on top of that, it's a burden they'll have to carry, and the next agency will have to deal with it too. So this is something that happened recently with a client. Technical problem with their current agency, the site loses 80% of its traffic. Their solution is to send out some rather spammy AI content. They publish dozens of lousy blog posts. It's useless. It just creates a burden. When I come in, I'll have to fix the technical problems first and then get rid of the AI blog posts, which were also very poorly written. I'm not against AI. We use AI ourselves, but we do it with manual oversight. And we make sure that it's well targeted with the right intentions in general. We're not going to blame the tool. Obviously, we're going to criticize the methods and the strategy being used. So that's basically it. And overall, the goal of all this is obviously to have KPIs to track, to know whether you want to do SEO or C. Now, that's also a question you can ask yourself. If you want rapid growth and you have a viable ROAS, honestly, do CR. It will be much faster and much, much more effective. On the other hand, if you stop, you haven't built up any capital, you haven't created any assets, you don't have a site that generates business on its own. The advantage of an SEO agency is that if in a year you have good results and you decide to stop working with us, and I'm completely fine with that, honestly, there's no problem. The results will still be there and you'll keep generating cash with leads with this method, with the SEO we've done for potentially another 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years for the best cases. There will always be a need to come back and do SEO at some point or another. But if you need rapid growth and you have a budget to spend and you're getting a good ROAS on what you're doing, then do CA as well. You shouldn't deprive yourself of growth and acquisition methods after a certain point. So when it comes to KPIs, which we'll measure to determine whether an SEO service is performing or not, it's generally organic traffic and the ranking on a few strategic keywords. Generally, we measure 10 to 15 keywords, which are the business keywords, the important keywords where we are expected to perform. We need to do some work there and also look at the overall traffic to see what's happening. And beyond that, of course, there's the business aspect, meaning the number of leads generated, but that depends on your tracking on your end. It's usually up to you to manage that. That's generally everything you need to know about an SEO service, how much it costs, and so on. I'll leave the blog post directly in the description for you. That way you can check all of that out, see what we've produced, and get an idea how we calculate this on our end. If you ever want a quote to work with us, don't hesitate at all. You'll find a direct contact point in the description. Otherwise, you can go to our website, contact me, and you'll reach me directly. I'll ask you plenty of questions to really understand your situation, what exactly we're dealing with, your goals, and how we'll track progress. And then what happens next? I'll present you with a quote. What do our quotes look like? Usually it's a nice presentation that lasts a good 30 minutes to explain the entire strategy to you, how we work, who we are, and so on. And so that you have as many details as possible to help you visualize things and to make sure we're all clear on what's expected. It's simply so you know exactly what we're going to do with the budget you entrust to us. We always put the prices right next to it. To give you an example, with us, content for a page will cost 150 euros. If it is produced and integrated directly onto your site, that's the price we charge, 150 euros. That comes out to about an hour and a half of work. That's the amount of time it takes to create a page. If we were to pay by the word or do things differently, the prices could be a bit different. But in this case, we work based on time because with AI, it's more relevant. So we prefer to work based on time. For the backlink management part, for example, what we charge is for every 100 euros invested in backlinks. Generally, we charge 100 euros for campaign management on our end. That's the time we spend to go and find the backlink, create the content, publish it, and if it's rejected, replace it, etc. So the goal is to have a service, a strategy that is optimal, where we don't charge extra fees for premium backlinks or anything like that. If we buy backlinks at 50 euros because we think they're more relevant, we buy backlinks at 50 euros. We're not going to overcharge you for them. We'll resell them to you at the exact price we pay, and we charge separately for the campaign management budget. And for the technical part, it's an estimate of the time involved. And here I do a TGM calculation in my head, and that allows me to determine this. Generally, on our side, we always allocate 100 or 200 euros dedicated to communication, reporting, calls, making sure everything is well structured so that you don't experience any frustration with your SEO service. And the rest, of course, goes toward growing your site. And that's it. With that, I wish you all a great day. I hope this has helped clarify the costs of SEO services for you. And if you have any questions, you know where to reach me, directly in the description or on the website. Thank you all.